I'm reading to you today from Matthew chapter 24. This is a discourse of Jesus, sometimes called the Olivet Discourse, because he is sitting on the Mount of Olives, answering the questions of his disciples concerning the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. They say to him, his disciples, "When shall these things be? What shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the age?" Or the end of the world, as King James has it. We've pointed out before, the word for world there is the word age. They're talking about the end of the age in which the destruction of the temple is the culminating event. Not the age in which we live, but the age in which they lived. It's interesting, I'll say in passing, that this discourse of Jesus, called the Olivet Discourse, is found in 3 of the 4 Gospels. Some version of it. It's found in Matthew's Gospel here in 24. It's found in Luke's Gospel. It's found in Mark's Gospel. But it is not found in John's Gospel. It has been suggested that John, the writer of John's Gospel, who is also the writer of the Revelation, did not include the Olivet Discourse because his book of Revelation is a whole book devoted to what is contained in this Olivet Discourse. So we've been reading it, and again, before I begin to read anymore, let me set the context. Jesus has just confronted the scribes and the Pharisees for the final time. He has pronounced judgment upon them. He's pronounced judgment upon Jerusalem. Let me just remind you of what he said. He ends it up in chapter 23 by saying, "That upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel unto the blood of Zacharias, son of Barachias." When he says you, he means not someone else, but those people he was addressing, the scribes and the Pharisees, in his day, in that generation. He says in verse 36, "Verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation." Now, what generation is that? Well, that generation alive right then. There's no other way to see it. There is really no other way to read this. He means the generation then alive. And interestingly, the event that he then describes, the temple being destroyed, the Jewish temple, it takes place in 70 A.D. We know that as a historical fact. It's well attested. Exactly 40 years from the time in which Jesus said these words. One biblical generation, 40 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus, the temple is destroyed in 70 A.D., exactly as he foretold. Now, in chapter 24 of Matthew, Jesus said, "All these things will be thrown down, there shall not be left one stone upon another." The disciples, evidently quite concerned with having a right to be concerned, they come to him and say, "When shall these things be?" In other words, when is this going to take place? A valid question. You have to keep in mind, these are real people asking a real question, when shall these things be? Now, if Jesus had in mind that the things described in chapter 24 were going to take place in the faraway future, he could have done them a great favor by saying, "Listen guys, don't worry about it. It's not having anything to do with you. There are some people you don't know anything about who haven't even been born yet. 2,000 years from now, there's a generation coming who are going to experience all these things. So here's what you do. Just write it down for them, but you forget about it. You'll be dead and gone." He does not say that. That would have been a good opportunity, but people read this chapter, somehow they read this chapter as though that's what he meant. He never even told them to write anything down. Of course, we're the beneficiaries of the fact that they did. But when he says to them, when they say, "When will these things be?" they're concerned about themselves. And when he answers their question, he is concerned about them. And the answer to their question is for their benefit, so they can avoid the judgment that is coming upon the people who rejected Jesus. So let's go on reading. "When shall these things be?" Verse 4, Jesus answered and said, "Take heed that no man deceive you." You means them, the disciples of Jesus. "For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many." That happened. He told them it would happen, and it did happen. They experienced that. "You shall hear of rumors of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled." Again, you means them, not us, the people he's talking to. "For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes in divers places. These are only the beginning of sorrows." I would only remind you of what we read in a previous message from the Message translation. The Message translation translates it this way: don't get excited, this is only routine history. And if you know anything about history, you know that that's true. There has never been a time in history when there were not wars. There has never been a time in history when there were not famines and plagues and all of the things he described here. What he's saying is, when you hear these things, don't let these things throw you off course. This is just routine history. Then it says in verse 9, "Then shall they deliver you to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake." When he says you, he doesn't mean us, he means them. Now this I hope, will be a relief to you if you have been laboring under the false notion that all of these things are going to come to pass in our lifetime, that some political ruler is going to rise up and fulfill this prophecy. Now, these things could happen. I imagine people in World War II, the Jews in World War II, when they were taken to the concentration camps, they might have had a right to look at some of these things and see parallels, but that wasn't what it's talking about. He is talking about people living in his lifetime, the disciples of Jesus, and he says to them, you will be hated of all nations for my name's sake. They will afflict you, they will kill you, and you can read in the book of Acts. You don't have to go any further into history than the book of Acts. It tells all these things were fulfilled right in the book of Acts. And you can read in history how there's more examples of the same kind of thing. Verse 10, and then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall rise, and shall deceive many. Did you know there's a Jewish man named Josephus who collaborated with the Romans? He was actually captured by the Romans, and so he made a wise decision and decided to help the Romans. And he wrote a history of the Jewish wars and the suppression of the Jewish rebellion by the Romans. He wrote a detailed history, and he describes all the things that we are reading about here in great detail. These exact things did happen. False prophets came and deceived the people. They told the people, God will never destroy His temple. Stay here in the temple. God will vindicate us. God will save us. Guess what? God did not vindicate them. God did not save them. Just as Jesus said, not one stone was left upon another. There were many false prophets. Verse 12. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. Not talking about our day, talking to them about things they would experience in their day. But he that shall endure to the end, the same shall be saved. Not speaking to us, speaking to them. Talking about the trouble they were going to live through. He says, hold on, don't get upset, endure to the end, and you will be saved. This gospel of the kingdom must be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. Now, people completely misapply this verse today and think that everybody on planet Earth has to hear the gospel and then something's going to happen. That can never happen. If that's what that means, that can never take place because new people are being born every day. How are you going to reach newborn infants and little children that are born? No matter what the media does, no matter what the internet does, you cannot fulfill it that way. And besides, He is not even, if you'll understand what we've been saying and put this in context, He is not even speaking of that kind of a situation. He's saying this gospel will be witnessed to. When He says all the world, He means representatives of all nations. That's what He's talking about. And you can read in the book of Acts when representatives, we're even told in chapter 2 of Acts that representatives of all nations heard the wonderful works of God in their own tongues, in their own languages. And that's a good fulfillment. We could read some others right here, even in the New Testament, to talk about this verse being fulfilled. And look at verse 15. This is critical and key. When you, now who's you? The disciples of Jesus, the people right in front of His face. When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let him which be in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down and take anything out of the house. Neither let him that is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray that your flight be not in winter, neither on the Sabbath day. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world, and to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. And if any man shall say unto you, Lo, here is Christ, believe them not. For there shall arise many false Christs and false prophets, and show great signs and wonders, insomuch that, if it be possible, they should deceive the very elect. Behold, I have told you before. Now, He told them all of these things for their benefit. He says, when you see the abomination spoken of by Daniel the prophet, here's what you do. You flee from Judea. You that are in Judea, flee to the mountains. I've even heard people who want to make this in an incomprehensible to me way applied to our modern day, saying, well, what that means is, if you happen to be visiting Jerusalem, if you happen to be in Israel, and then you see the Antichrist coming to the temple, then that's your time to flee from Jerusalem, flee from Judea out into the mountains. That is really absurd. That is so absurd it's not even worth commenting on. He's talking to His disciples who were going to see the things He's talking about. Now in the next message we'll describe what this means, that He's warning them, that will be their sign to flee to the mountains.